Back in late 2007, I had just come off of games like Tales of Symphonia, Skies of Arcadia Legends, and Batten Kaitos. I was young and impressionable and thought games got objectively better over time. So when I see a game is published by Namco Bandai and with a score from Matoi Sakuruba, I'm just to assume it's the next best thing. This was back when I regularly downloaded demos to try games out, but then ultimately rented this game from a brick and mortar rental store. While a good chunk of JRPG fans are familiar with the name Eternal Sonata, I'm making a claim that not many people really played it, or at least, few gamers played it beyond a certain point. Taking rough numbers from TrueAchievements.com, just around 10,000 gamers started Eternal Sonata and cleared the first chapter. Only 4,000 people beat the game, again based off of these same statistics from TrueAchievements.com, only on the Xbox 360 version. Now, to get this out of the way, all of my findings and opinions are going to be on the 360 version, as it's the only version I've played, as the PS3 version came out over a year later with added content and enhancements to make for what is hopefully a better experience. That being said, there are far more RPG fans owning PlayStation consoles versus Xbox machines, so it could be argued that plenty of people have finished Eternal Sonata, but there's really no easy or accurate way of checking this, is there? Eternal Sonata currently maintains a solid 79 score on Metacritic, was released on September 17th of 2007, and is known as Trusty Bell, Chopin's Dream in Japan. Eternal Sonata was developed by Tri-Crescendo, not to be confused with Tri-Ace, and are best known for helping with the development of both Batten Kaitos games and Tales of Symphonia Chronicles. I usually don't dwell on the metascore of a game, and tend to just reference it to make an individual point about how the game was viewed by critics. However, in the case of Eternal Sonata, I'm forced to wonder how it has such a high score. I don't mean to instantly go full-blown pessimistic, but I'm making a huge assumption in stating that the majority of these critics did not actually finish the game's story. While a 20-hour-long RPG isn't especially daunting to a seasoned RPG fan, it's pretty long considering the average critic's workflow. That considered, anyone who may have actually beaten Eternal Sonata would hopefully notice the game's flaws, primarily the repetition and poor writing. Then consider the possibility that a good amount of these reviewers have not kept up to date with the JRPG genre. No writer wants to piss off this crowd, and if they're not familiar with what makes a good JRPG, well, good, then their hand is kind of forced. It's like the case with Dynasty Warriors, where you simply write, fans of the series will love this game, but there's nothing exciting enough to bring in new gamers. Giving the game an 80, which is almost universal among the Metacritic samplings of reviews, is bizarre to say the least. I'm not pointing any fingers, but I'd bet money that the average reviewer played the first 8 hours or so and called it a day. So, negativity out of the way. What did I think of Eternal Sonata? Well, I first played this game back in 2007, and I thought it was gorgeous, though I recall feeling the gameplay was a bit boring. So between 2007 and 2014, I had restarted my playthrough of Eternal Sonata over 5 times, mainly out of fear that I had missed some silly collectibles that were necessary for getting all of the achievements. While they aren't a reflection of the game itself, this game's achievements are beyond dated, and have caused myself hours of grief. Hell, it took me 7 years to finish a game that might take someone 40 hours to complete. This game is burned into my memory forever, and yet it's also forgettable. The issues of mediocrity begin almost immediately with the characters. The game's lead, Allegretto, is almost a poster child for cliché RPG designs, complete with shiny hair, a shoulder pad with a feather on it, huge boots, and too many belts to really make any sense. It's not that I hate Allegretto, in fact, he's one of the better characters of the game in terms of usability, and his English voice isn't annoying, which is always a plus. He's not so much a problem, just a bit average. The real problem comes with the game's secondary protagonist, Polka, who is actually the first character you use in the game. Technically speaking, she is the central focus of the game's narrative, which is kind of odd if you take a big look at the game's story and world. Anyway, she's worthless. In terms of in-game combat, she is among the game's worst 3 characters. This is just unusual. Sure, other games give you weak female characters, it's not unheard of, but the power difference between Allegretto, an above-average character in strength, and Polka, who is among the worst, is too severe to be forgivable. Characters you meet at later points in the game can do crazy amounts of damage in single turns of battle. Let's say something like 20,000, while a same level Polka might be able to scrape out 8,000 on a good day. Oh, and during the strong character's onslaught, he or she might also manage to heal your entire team's health completely. This might sound like a minor gripe that one character is weak, but it continues. Of the game's 10 characters, Okay, there's 12 on the PS3. Only about 4 are really ever used once you get a full party. It's a case of inconsistency, and this goes beyond the character's balancing, which I'm convinced was never properly tested. In terms of individual character importance, the strong ones have almost nothing to do with the game's story. They may appear and have moderate ties to particular issues, but they seem to just be there to fill in the game's 20 hours with a more busy and convoluted plot. So, to make that clear, strong characters have minimum involvement in the game's story, whereas the important characters who do most of the talking and are the most affected by the plot are literally unusable. Quests and missions are all over the place. Most of the game's progression comes from traveling from area to area, so the gameplay is a literal statement of the story's progression as well. A few times you're roadblocked by a mission which requires you to save a small boy or visit a cemetery, but so little of it is actually important in the grand scheme of things. The story in role-playing games traditionally get more important and dangerous as things progress, but with Eternal Sonata, there are random injections of pointlessness. You never feel like you've moved beyond emptying the basement of giant rats, so to speak. When the missions arise that should feel dramatic and dangerous finally do occur, they're over too quickly. The pacing is awful, is all I'm really getting at. As if the game's content was rushed in favor of the game's graphics and sound design. Eternal Sonata's combat is a joke. Literally, all that you, the player, does in combat is mash an attack button in real time and occasionally trigger a special attack. The more regular attacks that land, the more damage the special will incur. Eventually, you can chain special attacks together, but it's also basic that it justifies the game's cheerful graphical tone. This extends to enemies, which are all somewhat toddler-friendly, yet this contradicts itself later with tonal matter of death and contemplating existence. What the hell is going on with this game? Seriously, at one point you're defeating oversized onions and weird scorpions. Then a character is killed, and the player is forced to watch over 10 minutes of internal monologue about love and mortality. To put an artsy-fartsy hat on, you can pull hundreds of analogies. Life is beautiful, yet so cruel and ugly. But that's way too much of a stretch for me to truly consider. At the end of the game, when you look back at everything that has happened, you'll realize that not much was going on with the game's literal story progression. How ironic is it for a game largely about death to say the journey does not matter? We could say that the journey intentionally doesn't matter. Everyone dies and that's okay. But that doesn't excuse the creation of a 20-hour-long JRPG with abysmal pacing and boring quests. Gamers going for the completion will spend twice that time on this game, with the second encore playthrough adding very little. I've yet to mention it, but the game does try and have a large focus on music. Hell, half of the game's story is about Chopin the composer. But in all honesty, it's primarily hammed in, and rarely means much unless you think hard. Replaying the game will make you notice more of the world, and that's similar to listening to a song where it's essentially the same but with more details. But again, that's a stretch that could be used on just about any game. If you do want to play Eternal Sonata, it's pretty cheap, so it's hard to tell anyone not to play it, especially considering that the soundtrack is masterful. But Matsui Sakuruba is also my favorite composer, so that's a given for me, even though I can't really pronounce his name. Now, I really just warned that the combat is abysmal and not a good indicator of any kind of RPG, especially the similarly categorized Baten Kaitos and Tales of series. The ending of this game is fascinating in that if you don't look up the metaphor, you're probably going to be left extremely confused. Yet when the ending is explained, which only came out of a translation of a Japanese strategy guide, it's certainly clever. So clever, I think it was the basis of the development of Eternal Sonata. Either that, or Namco wanted the game to showcase that generation of console's power using cel-shaded graphics.